Governor Walz, you blame Donald Trump. Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate.
Now, the person closest to them, Donald Trump, said he's unfit for the highest office. That was Senator Vance.
It didn't take long for the gloves to come off in the first and only debate between the vice presidential candidates, but there was a lot of Midwest nice on that stage. Today on Close Up, we also look at the policies both men laid out and how voters reacted to the exchange.
I'm going to fight for everyday Iowans to expand the middle class, to bring down our costs and ensure our rights and freedoms.
Christina Bohannon is running for Congress as a Democrat in Iowa's 1st District. She says those voters need government that works for the people.
I have shown to the 1st District of Iowa that I work endlessly and tirelessly for them, to serve them.
Republican incumbent Mariannette Miller Meeks running for re-election, why she wants to keep her seat and continue serving Iowans in her district.
This is Iowa's news leader. This is KCCI 8 News Close Up.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us for KCCI 8 News Close Up. I'm Chief Political Reporter Amanda Rooker. Well, last week, Republican Senator J.D. Vance and Democratic Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota took part in the first and likely only vice presidential debate in New York City. Now, that debate, we saw a lot of Midwest nice. Both of those candidates are from Midwestern areas, but both candidates also fielded questions on foreign policy, immigration, abortion, the economy, and more. Now, both men took aim at the candidates at the top of the ticket, and so we want to talk about it a little bit more with KCCI political analyst Dennis Goldford. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Sure.
Now, compared to some of the other recent debates that we've been watching, this one stood out in a different way. What about it felt different to you, Dennis?
Two things. This was a mostly civil debate. In other words, people weren't angry with each other. And it was a more substantive debate. In a way, it was more a debate for policy wonks. I mean, if you got down in the weeds with all the particular policies they talked about and stuck with it, you were pretty good, because it was a lot of work to do that. But it certainly wasn't an angry, tense debate. It was a much more traditional debate.
Does that say anything about the type of voters that at this point in the race these candidates are trying to pick up?
Well, I think to some extent, Senator Vance was trying to come across this time as the nice guy rather than the MAGA Republican, the full MAGA Trump Republican. But of course, he was still fully defending his main client, former President Trump. But I think that both candidates' job was to do a good job for the top of the ticket on each side. Because we have to remember, the VP debate almost never matters. It almost never matters. And even if some of the polls suggested that Vance might have had a little bit better of the evening, again, it doesn't matter. It wouldn't have mattered if it had gone the other way. So I think you have a debate that was interesting in a way in policy terms and in terms of the interpersonal dynamics. But at the same time, if people were looking for a car crash or a self-destruction, the way we saw with the Biden-Trump debate earlier in the summer, that didn't occur.
And speaking of that, there was some policy that was laid out. Looking at the earlier presidential debate, Trump seemed to talk a ton about immigration, but there wasn't a lot of policy that got laid out on it. There maybe was a little bit more substantive talk on that issue in the vice presidential debate. We want to take a listen to that soundbite.
We have to stop the bleeding. We have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started and said that she wanted to undo all of Donald Trump's border policies.
Donald Trump had 4 years. He had 4 years to do this. And he promised you, America, how easy it would be. I'll build you a big, beautiful wall, and Mexico will pay for it. Less than 2% of that wall got built, and Mexico didn't pay a dime.
Now, again, as you mentioned, the two of them were really working to attack, their opponent on the top of the ticket, on their other side.
Yes, of course. And one of the issues for both of them is that the term we hear so much now, fact-checking. There were a lot of claims made, particularly by Mr. Vance, I have to say, that really just didn't hold water. At the same time, clearly the Republicans see as their major issue this year the question of illegal immigration, along with various culture wars sorts of things, prayer and sex education and things like that. And we saw that come through very much in his part. What we saw was from Walz was an attempt, of course, to use Vance's own words against him from the time that Vance, was critical of then candidate Trump a while ago.
Now, on the flip side, what Democrats have really campaigned on heavily was reproductive rights. Some of that conversation also came up during the debate.
Let voters make these decisions. Let the individual states make their abortion policy. And I think that's what makes the most sense in a very big, a very diverse, and let's be honest, sometimes a very, very messy and divided country.
Just mind your own business on this. Things worked best when Roe versus Wade was in place.
Now, looking at the messaging on immigration and abortion, two topics that they both have been campaigning heavily on, do you think that they were able to sway, any other voters through this debate?
No, not really.
Sure.
The positions are pretty much set in concrete. And what you saw with Senator Vance was an attempt to sort of change the argument over whether we should have abortion rights or not, whether you're pro-choice or pro-life, was to say it's essentially a state issue, let the states decide this. And that's how he tried to shift that debate.
Well, Dennis, that's all the time that we have. We always appreciate you joining us. Thanks.
Sure.
And we also want to take a look at a recent CBS News poll of debate watchers. It found that 42% of debate watchers said Vance won the debate, while 41% thought Walz emerged as the winner, pretty close there. 17%, though, called the debate a tie. Now, the candidates were seen as even on some of the issues that came up, including the economy and the conflict in the Middle East. Now, Walz was seen as better talking about health care and abortion, while Vance had the edge on immigration. Now, we're also getting to know all of the Iowans running for Congress ahead of November's general election. Today, specifically, we're focusing on District 1 that encompasses most of southeast Iowa. Warren, Marion, and Jasper counties are also part of this district. Republican incumbent Mariannette Miller Meeks faces Democratic challenger Christina Bohannon. I sat down with both of them to talk about why they're running and the top issues they want to tackle.
In April and May.
Republican Mariannette Miller Meeks is hoping southeastern Iowans will send her back for a third term on Capitol Hill.
I've been consistent, I've been accessible, I have been available, I listen. I'm trying to craft policy that brings down healthcare prices, addresses the high prices for their cost of living, and making our upcoming world the place where young people want to be, grow, and fulfill their potential.
Do you solemnly swear?
Miller Meeks was first elected to Congress in 2020. She won by just 6 votes, one of the closest races in U.S. history.
God bless Iowa, God bless the United States.
She was reelected in 2022 and that time won around 53% of the vote, defeating Democrat Christina Bohannon. Bohannon's giving it another go, running again to unseat Miller Meeks.
Since the last election, since 2022, we have seen even more of what I've just described, even more of that extremism, even more of that tribalism between parties. We need to get back to basics and hear what's going on in people's lives and work to address that rather than fighting amongst ourselves in Washington, D.C.
Outside groups see an opening. Bohannon's had help from the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, and the National Republican Congressional Committee is lending resources to Miller Meeks. Right now, active voter registration shows Republicans have an edge. As of September 1st, nearly 37% of active voters in the 1st District are Republicans, compared to nearly 32% for Democrats. A rematch for Iowa's 1st District, why Christina Bohannon says she wants a second shot to try to unseat Mariannette Miller Meeks. Welcome back to Close Up. With roughly 4 weeks until Election Day, we're getting to know the candidates running to represent Iowa's 1st District, which covers southeast Iowa. It's a rematch from 2022. Democrat Christina Bohannon is again trying to unseat Republican incumbent Mariannette Miller Meeks.
I know what it's like to be a political outsider.
Democrat and University of Iowa law professor Christina Bohannon says she's running for Congress to give hardworking Iowans a fair shot.
I grew up in a town of 700 in a family that never, was involved with politics and didn't have any money or any influence. And I know what it's like to work hard every day and still struggle to put food on the table. And I am going to fight for everyday Iowans to expand the middle class, to bring down our costs, and ensure our rights and freedoms going forward.
It's Bohannon's second time running to unseat Republican incumbent Mariannette Miller Meeks. In 2022, Miller Meeks defeated Bohannon by about 21,000 votes.
You ran for this seat in 2022. This is your second time running for it against the same opponent. What made you decide, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring for a second time, I'm going to give this another go?
We laid a great foundation when I ran in 2022. We started something that I think is really special here in Southeast Iowa. You know, we created a foundation of volunteers who are excited about this campaign, and they wanted another shot. And I think people asked me, hey, you know, will you run again? We want to work with you to bring some change to Southeast Iowa.
That change includes work on agriculture.
The Farm Bill is job one for any Iowa representative. That is your very first job.
The Farm Bill is a massive piece of legislation that helps support farmers, conservation efforts, and food assistance programs like SNAP and WIC. It expired last month, and the clock is ticking for Congress to pass a new 5-year policy. Bohannon says Iowans need action.
Farmers are really having a tough time competing with these huge corporations and these out-of-state interests who are affecting agriculture here in Iowa. And so I will fight for the Farm Bill. We need to make sure that we are giving farmers the resources they need to help us solve, soil quality issues, water quality issues, climate issues. Farmers in Iowa are smart, they're resourceful, they know how to get this done. We have to give them not unfunded mandates, but resources to help us solve some of these huge problems and to help feed the world. And so when I am in Congress, I will fight for all of that in our Farm Bill.
On immigration, Bohannon says she supports the bipartisan border bill that was blocked by Senate Republicans in February. It would have added more Border Patrol agents, more technology to screen for fentanyl, and created a new system to quickly process migrants seeking asylum.
We have to secure the border. We have to stop fentanyl and the flow of drugs coming across the border into our country. I have been saying this for 3 years. I was one of the first to criticize President Biden, saying he acted too slow to secure the border. But let's be clear, okay? Congress is the one that bears the brunt of the responsibility under our Constitution for dealing with immigration. When I'm in Congress, I will vote to secure the border. I would have voted for that exact same very strict bill, the bill that Joni Ernst, our Republican senator, said is one of the best opportunities we would have had to secure the border in our lifetimes. I would have voted for that bill.
She's also campaigning on lowering costs for Iowans.
I want to bring down those costs, make sure that we're creating good paying jobs, expanding the middle class, holding corporations accountable for corporate greed.
And reproductive rights.
Do you believe that Congress should pass a federal abortion policy? And if so, what specifically do you think a federal abortion policy should include?
Yeah, so, the law in the country was Roe versus Wade for half a century. And, not everybody agreed with that. Sure, there were still debates over it, but it was the law for half a century, and it struck a balance, the right balance in freedom to control your own body. And so, I think that that's what we need to get back to. And so I would support putting Roe versus Wade, no more, no less, back into federal legislation.
Do you think that there needs to be a federal protection of IVF treatment?
I do. I absolutely do. Because what we saw in Alabama was a Supreme Court there, but it could happen in state legislatures just as easily, of them wanting to limit women's ability to use IVF fertility treatments. And we can't allow that to happen in different states around the country. People should be able to have a child. Look, this isn't a matter of fundamental freedom. Places like China tell people how many children that they can have. We don't do that in the United States. People get to choose whether, when, and how to have a child here. And in vitro fertilization is an important part of that for many, many women and families who can't do it on their own.
Bohannon also says she'd work across the aisle to help relieve gridlock in Congress.
When your own party is obstructing what you need to get done for your own district, then you stand up to your own party. And I have done that. I ran against a 20-year incumbent of my own party. I was one of the few Iowa Democrats who stood up and said that Joe Biden needs to step aside. I have been willing to stand up to my own party. Sometimes it's not always been popular, but you have to do that to do what's right for the people you represent.
She points to her record as a state lawmaker, serving 2 years in the Iowa House.
I have great relationships with a lot of Republicans in the Iowa legislature. We worked very closely together on things like, stopping human trafficking in Iowa. We worked together on an elder abuse prevention bill. Those are things that we were able to do together. And there are those opportunities in Congress. But we've got to break out of this very siloed politics, break out of this type of politics where it's all about, corporations and special interests or caving to the extreme members of your party or doing exactly whatever your party leadership tells you to do. We need an independent voice for Iowa who is going to stand up to their own party when needed and work with the other party when needed to get the job done for hardworking Iowans.
When we come back, we hear from Bohannon's opponent, Mariannette Miller Meeks, why she says she's the best one to represent Iowans in the 1st District and the work she hopes to accomplish in a 3rd term. Welcome back to Close Up. Republican incumbent Mariannette Miller Meeks currently holds Iowa's 1st congressional district seat. She was first elected in 2020, winning by just 6 votes. Miller Meeks won by a larger margin in 2022, and now she's hoping for another 2 years on Capitol Hill. Republican Mariannette Miller Meeks has served 2 terms in Congress, representing most of Southeast Iowa.
I have shown to the 1st District of Iowa that I work endlessly and tirelessly for them, to serve them.
She says there's more work to accomplish in a 3rd term.
We've got several bills on lowering prescription drug prices. The Drug Act, it's a bill that I want to get across the finish line. It is something that, number one, would save the government over $650 million. And number 2, would bring down prices for patients immediately.
And more work to expand access to affordable health care.
We're seeing in Iowa a reduction in the providers that we have. We know that many places do not have obstetrical services anymore, or they don't have family practitioners that are doing obstetrical work. So how can we use AI? How can we use telehealth? How do we change and increase the numbers of graduate medical education slots so that we can increase the number of providers?
Miller Meeks also says she'd continue supporting biofuels.
Iowa is a great role model for how you can use your own natural resources to create energy and reduce emissions. So the work I'm doing on biofuels, the work I'm doing on common sense, pragmatic energy solutions to be able to meet the increased energy demand, but also reduce emissions for a cleaner, healthier planet for our children and our grandchildren is very important to me, and I'm going to continue that great work that I'm doing.
What specific steps can you take in Congress to lower costs for Iowans?
Well, first and foremost, we have to look at our government spending. The next things we do is to look at government regulation and how that impacts businesses, how that impacts people from being able to create a business, grow the economy. In other words, regulation can impede economic growth, so people can have higher salaries, more mobility within their jobs, and then to make sure our safety nets remain stable and remain funded.
Miller Meeks is also campaigning on border security.
First and foremost, we have got to secure the southern border. We can't have 10 million people coming into this country and hundreds of people that are on the terror watch list. We don't have security of our southern border. It is an issue, and it's a national security issue.
And pushing for immigration reform.
I have a bill on America's Children's Act. So these are children who are here legally on their parents' visas. These children, when they get to adulthood, have to apply for a visa in their own name. Because our Customs and Immigration Service is so inefficient, I had a bill that U.S. Customs and Immigration, the State Department, was wasting green cards. What does that mean? For people to come here legally, we have thousands of people on a waiting list, and yet they couldn't process because all the processing is going down at our southern border and now our northern border.
Her stance on abortion?
I am pro-life with exceptions for rape, incest, and the life of the mother.
Would you push to make abortion illegal at a federal level?
No.
You would leave abortion policy to the states?
Abortion policy is currently at the states where it's closer to the people. Let's stop making this a political football. Let's support women. Let's support families. Let's give them the tools that they need. And let's recognize that there are people who desperately, my sister again was another one of these, who desperately want to start their own family and give them the support and tools they need. So this isn't something that only higher class and wealthier people can afford, but that anybody at any level can afford.
Do you support protecting in vitro fertilization at the federal level? Do you think that there should be a law out of Congress saying that this treatment should be protected?
Last year we had a resolution that we passed through the House supporting in vitro fertilization. I have a bill currently and has been commented on by Speaker Johnson that he is favorable to getting something passed in the House. That bill has a $30,000 tax credit to individuals or families wanting or having difficulty with fertility issues and needing to undergo in vitro fertilization.
And on agriculture,
we haven't given up on the Farm Bill. We're still working. We're still negotiating.
Miller Meeks says she wants to pass a new 5-year farm bill. Congress was supposed to pass a new one last year, but lawmakers have not been able to strike a deal. Miller Meeks says there are several pieces of ag policy that need to be included.
Crop insurance is one of those things that has to be in the Farm Bill. You know, farmers are at risk to, whatever nature is doing at any particular point in time. And right now we have corn that's under $4 a bushel and we have soy that's under $10 a bushel. That's at the level where farmers start to go bankrupt. So we're in a very precarious position. Farmers were concerned. They thought they were okay last year, but this year was going to be difficult for them. So crop insurance is one of those issues in the Farm Bill. Vaccine development for animal agriculture, testing, monitoring, how both agricultural products or meat products come into this country, very important. And then the issue of trade. We haven't talked a lot about trade, but for Iowa agriculture, trade is very important. Opening up new trade markets, having fair trade practices, so that things don't go over to China and are at a port, and then the carcasses are said, well, they're rancid now, and so you have to take them back. Those are the types of trade practices that farmers have told me about that are very important to them.
If reelected, she says she would keep her focus on improving outcomes for Southeast Iowans.
Whether I'm in Iowa or whether I'm in D.C., I am meeting with individuals. I am known to get things done in Washington, D.C. So whether it's on a biofuel bill, whether it's on in vitro fertilization, whether it's on child care, we're going to keep advancing those things that make Iowa the best place to work, live, play, and raise a family.
KCCI is hosting a live hour-long debate in just 2 days between Iowa's 3rd District congressional candidates Lenon Beckham and Zach Nunn. That starts at 7 p.m. on KCCI on Tuesday. Well, thanks for joining us for KCCI 8 News Close Up. We'll see you back here next Sunday. Have a great day.